Okay, thanks again, everyone. Again, this is Nick Cruz from TerraSky. Thank you so much for joining us today. Want to point out again, as we're using a new conferencing service, there's a couple of control options that you'll see in your panel. So I want to make this as interactive and smooth as possible. So before we get started, I just want to point out at the bottom right, you should have a little message icon that should pull up the chat window. So if you have any questions at all throughout the entire webinar, please feel free to type those questions in, as we'll keep everybody muted through the call so that we don't have any background noise and interruptions. So we'll address any questions as they either as they come in, or we'll save some time at the end to go through questions then. If we don't get to them, we will certainly follow up after the call and take those one-on-one. So again, welcome to the SkyVisualEditor webinar. I will be joined briefly by my counterpart, Tony Nelson. But we look forward to sharing some new things with you on this webinar. So we've got a new release that recently came out. It's been a couple months now, but we're on SkyVisualEditor version 3.5. And always, moving towards new innovation and adding new features and components to the app, so that you can, do more and more with the Visualforce pages that you're building in SkyVisualEditor. So I want to cover very, very briefly just a list of some of the newest features that we've added in this release. And then after we go through that, I'm going to turn it over to Tony for a live demonstration. He's going to show you some of those new features, as well as how to build a page basically from a blank slate using our free layout component. And then he'll highlight some of the newer features. Like the slideshow component, how to edit Apex classes within the actual design studio, and then the conditional rendering as well. So real quickly, the newest features that we've built into the latest release, as I just briefly mentioned, one is the slideshow app component. What this does is gives you the ability to take files, image files, pictures that are stored in Chatter or somewhere on your platform, and you can display those on Visualforce pages. Whether they're internal to a specific group, and you have different banners, for example, that you'd want to show your salespeople for extra motivation, or to add some branding elements, whatever the case may be, you can add those and cycle through in a slideshow. The other big release big add to this release is the in-studio extended Apex class editor. So now you don't have to go back and forth between the studio editor and Salesforce to add your Apex classes. Tony's going to briefly show how you can add those directly within the studio. So we've also added conditional rendering as well, so you can show and hide different things based on how you set up different triggers. And then we've also we're not going to go too far into it on this particular webinar, just given the time, but we've also enhanced some of the mobile design features for Salesforce One, and how you adding more elements that you can use to build, mobile apps and mobile pages that'll render really well and really nicely on mobile screens. So those are some of the those are just basically the highlights and the biggest, newest features that we've added on this latest release. And stay tuned, because we've got another one coming up right around the corner, right around the Dreamforce timeframe. So stay tuned for that, and we've got some really cool stuff coming in that one. So without further ado, though, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Tony. And bear with us, so I just go ahead and make him the presenter and give him the ability to talk as well.
Can you hear me, Nick?
Yep, I can hear you, Tony.
All right, perfect. So let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. And let me know, are you able to see the screen with Salesforce, or do you see my desktop?
I do see the screen with Salesforce, and just as I'm looking, another quick tip for those of you in the panel in the console. If you want to maximize the view space, there's a little arrow kind of off to the right side. You can hide some of the boxes showing the different attendees and maximize your screen space. So just a quick tip as we're, like I said, using this new conferencing feature. But go ahead and take it away, Tony.
All right, perfect. So let's just dive right in. I don't have a whole lot of time, and I want to make sure that we leave some room for Q&A. So as we're going through this, if you have questions, please type them in chat, and I'll make sure that Nick can ask all of your questions at the end of the webinar so we can keep this going nice and smooth. So what I'm going to show real quick are three of the features that Nick had mentioned. I won't show anything on the Salesforce one just due to time, but I will be showing the other three. So what you can see right now on the Salesforce page is I have what we call the slideshow app component displayed on the home page of my Salesforce organization. So that's the three banners that you see continually rotating at the top. So what I've done is I've created some internal branding messaging that I want to send out to all of the users of Salesforce, reminding them of important company events. Now, this is just one example of things you could do, but you do have the capability of pulling these images from Chatter or some other fixed URL location. So this is just one quick example of a common use case that I've seen people leverage this component for and could be something that might be of benefit to your company as well. The next one is going to be conditional rendering. We'll just dive into this one real quick. Oh, not that one. So this is the conditional rendering use case. We have a Visualforce page that I've created here. You can see that Visualforce page inside of our design studio, which I'll cover in just a moment. And the basic scenario that we have in this one is that I have created a record layout for the account page, and I want this red section called address information to only appear when I set the account type equal to prospect. If it's not equal to prospect, I don't care about their address information. It's not relevant at this point in time, and I want it hidden from the users. So if I go back into Salesforce where this page is created, if you notice the address information tab has nothing in it. Again, if I set the account type to prospect, I now will have the address information appear based on that condition being true. So you're able to dynamically show and hide different sections of your Visualforce pages based on various values being true or false or equivalent to some value that you specify. So this can provide a very rich interface for your users, especially if they have sections that they don't necessarily use all that often or are only relevant when certain values are entered at different times. And a majority of the components that are in SkyVisualEditor have the capability of being rendered dynamically. And the way we actually go about doing that in the studio is quite simple. You select the section that you'd like to have dynamically rendered. So in this case, I'll choose the outer shell for the address information. And on the right-hand side, there's a property called Display Settings. So I can click this, and then inside of the pop-up window, you'll see that we have the conditional settings. So I've said that when the account type field, which you can choose any field that's on the canvas, is equal to a value that is in its pick list, I chose prospect, that it needs to be shown. And if that's not true, don't show it until that value changes. So it's very simple to create those logical expressions. If your developers are in-house and they prefer not to use some graphical element, they do still have the ability to manually code that in. So that bottom section where it says manual settings, that's more of the developer-friendly route. This middle section is more for the business administrator who's not necessarily comfortable doing Visualforce and Apex development. So depending on your skill set, we do have options for both styles of user. And then the last portion is going to be what we call the Apex extension editor. So previously, when you wanted to add in your own custom logic, you had to deploy our pages into Salesforce, go back into the Salesforce environment, code out whatever Apex extension you wanted to add, which typically meant if you wanted some proprietary back-end behavior to take place that our tool couldn't reproduce, you would create an extension for that. And then once you had made that extension, you had to go back into our studio and tie it into the page. So it was a bit of a hassle for developers to do that. So we've streamlined this process, so now on the right-hand side there's an extended Apex class section, which was there previously. However, there's now an edit button inside of this area. And when you click this edit button, you'll be prompted with our in-studio editor. So now you can create your own Apex class extension directly inside of our studio, along with the test classes that go with it. This ultimately means that when our Visualforce pages are deployed into your environment, if you have created an extension, that these extensions and the code coverage test classes you make will also be created and deployed to Salesforce at the exact same time. So we're essentially giving you a centralized location to manage your Visualforce page in a holistic fashion. And then you just deploy everything into Salesforce in kind of a bundled API call. So it's really simple for developers to get in here. If you're not a developer, this may not be something you ever have to touch or worry about. But for those of you who do like getting in there and writing your own development stuff, whether that be Apex or JavaScript or custom CSS, these are going to be the kinds of features that we'll create and continue to create to further that experience for those of you that are in that market. All right, so let's get into the bulk of today's presentation, and this is going to be based on creating a page using our free layout. So some of you may be wondering, what is a free layout? That doesn't make sense to me. What we're looking at right now is what our studio calls a Salesforce layout. This is the typical way Visualforce pages are created using their framework. It's the typical container-driven method that Salesforce has in their Visualforce framework. The free layout kind of throws that container-driven environment to the wayside, and we do everything based on pixel manipulation. That means that your components will have an XY coordinate for where they should go on the page. Now, why is that important? Well, when you're recreating forms, you need to have very granular control on where they're placed. They are not necessarily going to be aligned in a block format when you have a form. So the one that we're going to recreate today, I have a section in my Salesforce organization called the Uniform Residential Loan Application. We're going to make this thing from scratch. And the way you typically would recreate forms in Salesforce without SkyVisualEditor is you would make your object, which would look like this, and then you would try and create some Visualforce page using the Salesforce layout to kind of reproduce the form that you had been working with previously on pen and paper or in a Word document. So instead of doing that, what we now can do using SkyVisualEditor is you can take your Word document or your PDF and you can actually turn it into a working, viable page for your users to experience just like they would outside of Salesforce in a different application. It provides a really smooth interaction for the user, a really high and simple, intuitive interface, and it typically is very clean cut whenever you create something like this. So if you notice, this is not your typical block or container-driven environment. Things will have to go in a very specific location to be filled out. So this is why it's important for us to have the XY coordinates for where things go. So again, we're going to recreate this form from scratch. So the first thing that we need to do is figure out how to get the form into Salesforce. So let me open up the location where I have this form. The way you would typically do this is you would take your Word document or your PDF document and you would convert it into an image, into a JPEG of some kind. Bear with me while my computer's loading things nice and slow. And as we go through and, let's see, where is that form? Here we go. So here's the PDF that I've created and turned it into an image. And as you begin to turn your Word document or your PDF into a series of images that represent the pages, we then can upload these pages to Salesforce as a static resource. So you're probably already very comfortable and familiar with using static resources. If not, it's a part of your setup environment under the Develop area on the left-hand side. And all you would do is simply upload this image, very similar to the method of uploading a document via notes and attachments. And so once this image is uploaded to Salesforce as a static resource, it then becomes available to the SkyVisualEditor Studio to utilize when you're creating your pages. And we're going to go through this very fast. That way I have about 5 or so minutes for Q&A before we wrap this up. Now, a quick overview of SkyVisualEditor Studio for those of you who may not be as familiar or as seasoned with working with it. We really have three areas of the platform. The far left-hand side is what we call our component palette. This is where all of the fields and the different visual elements will be dragged onto the canvas. The far right-hand side is going to be all of the property windows. So when you select an item, you'll have a series of properties that appear on the very far right panel, and that'll be important as we go through this. In the center of the screen, where you currently see the blue, red, and black banner bars, that is the actual Visualforce page we'll be working with. So this is going to be the page you see when you deploy to Salesforce. Now, this ultimately means that you're going to have really high capability of modifying these pages in a fast and timely manner because you're not having to dig through code to find the things that you need to change. You can do everything in a graphical way. So it makes it very simple to maintain and create pages moving forward. So let's make this page from scratch. So we go to File, we click New. We're going to go ahead and click OK to this. I'm going to navigate to the right and choose the free layout. Then you will pick your object that you'd like to work with. In my case, I have a custom object called the Uniform Residential Loan Application that has all of the fields that should exist on that document that are a part of that object before I ever start creating the page. And once I have that object selected, I go ahead and click OK. Now, you don't have to go create the data models. You don't have to go and figure out how to set up all the API calls. We do all that stuff for you. We want you to simply drag and drop the stuff onto the canvas and create the page visually. We'll take care of all that hard back-end stuff for you. So as you can see in the center of the screen, it's solid white. There's no image, no fields of any kind. It's a blank canvas. So on the far right-hand side, as we scroll down, there is a section called Background. This is where we're going to overlay that image that we've created, and this will be placed onto the page as a background image. We then will overlay the fields from Salesforce onto that background. So as you can see, when I click that background ellipsis, these are all of my static resources that exist within my Salesforce environment. This is why we had you convert that PDF or the Word document into an image of some kind so it could be available in this dialog box. Now I'm going to choose the one that I created, which is Form 1003, and click OK. Now what this is going to do is to paste this page as my background image. Now it's going to be the full size of a PDF, which means it's going to be far too large for this page, which you'll see in a second. And I'm going to have to resize it to fit the parameters of the page that we need. So as you can see, we're looking at the far upper left-hand corner, and we're missing a vast majority of the page. So if I look at the background section, we now have a width and a height property that's available to me. So I'm going to change the width property to be 1024, and then as I click off of that, it resizes the page to fit that form factor that we have. Now you can change the form factor. It's a property on the right-hand side under the width and height of the page property settings. By default, the 1024 by 768 is the same resolution as an iPad that is in landscape mode. That ultimately means that your page that we're making right now will also be viable to look at on the Salesforce One canvas on an iPad. So you don't have to do much converting of any kind to get it to work in the Salesforce One environment. It should just work on iPads. Now, if you have smaller devices like iPhones or other tablets that may be a bit smaller than the typical iPad, then you're going to have to resize that width and height to fit the appropriate form factor that you'd like to view this on if you are making a page for mobile. But again, by default, most people use iPads when they're using Salesforce One anyway. So now that we have this image as a background, we then need to overlay all of the fields on top of it. So on the far left-hand side, as you can see in the bottom left, we have all of the fields that are associated with my custom object. I now can find the field borrower and drag that onto the canvas and drop it in the location that I need. Remember, it's based on XY coordinates, so I can place it anywhere I want. Now I have the ability to stretch that field to fit that full bar where the user normally would sign their name or handwrite their name in. I can also do the same thing for the co-borrower and then stretch that to fit that area. And then we'll also do the same thing for the amount field. Drag that onto the canvas, stretch that to meet that new area. And then we'll do that for the interest rate. So the interest rate is the last field that we'll work with just for the sake of time, but I think you get the idea. Now if you notice, this one's a bit too large. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink it down, and then I'm going to move it upward so that it aligns with the other field that I've created. And so this is just a real quick way on how you can add those fields onto the canvas. The other thing I should point out is that since we started with a blank page, there are no save buttons on this page. No indication of how you can save or cancel the record of any kind. So we need to add those buttons to the canvas. On the far left-hand side, there's a component tab. I can click this, scroll about halfway down, and then you'll see the button area that we have. Now I'm going to just drag on the save button and the cancel button for the sake of time. But you may have other custom buttons that you want to add in, your own custom logic, or you may want to have a button that translates this page into a PDF or sends it to another app like DocuSign for a physical signature or a digital signature, I should say. And all of that's completely fine. You would just use the custom buttons to do any of that custom logic that you need to work with. So once these pages are created, you're done filling out the entire thing. How do you get this into Salesforce? Well, you simply go to File, click Deploy, choose the environment that you're going to be working with, whether that's Sandbox, Production, or a developer environment, and then click Deploy. Now, what's going to happen is this page that we've created in our studio will be saved inside of the SkyVisualEditor platform as an encrypted XML file. So that means that you can switch between your developer instance, your sandbox, and your production, and you still have access to the pages you've created in the other environments. Now what that really boils down to is you can quickly deploy the pages to other environments without having to do the change set methods that Salesforce has when you typically go from sandbox to production. So you can kind of bypass that if your company doesn't necessarily use the outbound and inbound change set methodology. And as you can see, the produced output is a Visualforce page and the Apex controller. Had you created your own custom extension, that would also be deployed with the page as well. And you see that we have the Visualforce name and the Apex name, which don't really make much sense as they currently stand. It is just the date timestamp for today, but you can change the name to make more meaning of the page in your environment. Then you go ahead and click Open, and we're now going to be viewing the page that we've made in just a couple of moments. You also have the capability of removing the sidebar and the header if you don't want those on the page. But as you can see, this is just a couple of minutes to create a page where I'm actually able to go in and add all of the fields that I needed to this page so I can make it look like an actual record or a form that we're filling out inside of Salesforce. So we've got a couple of minutes left, and Nick, I'll pass this back over to you to handle the questions, but I'll open this up for the Q&A for the last couple of minutes while we run through this.